Hi there, Pop-Tarts. The Elvis is back. The Elvis is pretty much back in the room, and I am loving having my hair away from my face so you can all marvel at my massive forehead. So with my YouTube channel and my blog, my website, my business, my creative life, the stuff that I make, I consider it all to be a part of that, and I consider it all to be kind of like different tentacles on the same creature, if you like. I don't really have any hard and fast rules about what I'm going to talk about, what order things are going to go in. I don't sit down at the beginning of a year or the beginning of a 6-month stretch and think to myself, what do I want to cover? What do I want to talk about? I really just wait and see what I feel called to do and what starts speaking to me. And I just kind of get that little voice in my ear, and a lot of the time it will be because of things I'm personally going through or have just come out the other side of, lessons that I've learned, etc. And other times it's going to be things that I've noticed people emailing me about, or clients are finding it's coming up for them. I'm finding that audience members want me to make a video about it, and I think, okay, now is the right time. So for me recently, a lot of stuff has been coming up about inner child work and the concept of the inner child as an archetype, and the idea of healing the inner child, activating the inner child, working with the inner child. And this is nothing that I haven't spoken about on the channel before. I'm no stranger to this particular subject, and the reason that I like to talk about it and revert back to it and share information about it is because it's been so vital to my healing journey as an individual. Inner child work and the idea of connecting with younger versions of myself has been pretty integral to the plot on my personal journey of healing. So I like to talk about things that I've seen the benefits of, and I like to talk about the things that I've noticed my clients reaping the benefits of. And I know that for a lot of people, inner child healing is kind of a cliche now, or the concept of the inner child is boring or kind of comes off as phony. But to me, I'm not interested in what's hot and what's not. I'm not interested in fucking fads. I'm not interested in finding, you know, that next frontier and leaving everything behind. If it works, I'm going to take it with me. I still want to find that next frontier. I still want to do that next thing. But the stuff that works, the stuff that's helped me, I'm not going to forsake that because, you know, we've been banging on about it forever, or it doesn't seem very cool, or it doesn't seem like, you know, the big thing right now. Inner child work, inner child healing, the concept of the archetype of the inner child is always going to be a big thing for me because it's helped me so much. And in this video I want to talk a little bit about why it's helped me and give some personal examples from my own journey to help people who might still be thinking of the archetype of the inner child as just a really abstract concept, because I know that for some people it can be really difficult to figure out how to work with the inner child. I'm going to leave 2 links below for videos that I've made. No, 3 links below for videos that I've made in the past about inner child work, inner child healing, self-parenting, that kind of thing, that you can also use. But I'm hoping to just add this to the collection and put some new thoughts into it to help people even more and help people kind of consider whether or not inner child healing might be something they want to mess around with and kind of involve themselves in. I think that for me, the very first awareness that I had of the idea of the inner child came from my mum. My mum started going to therapy when I was 14 years old. She had a hell of a lot of shit to sort out, and she embarked on a therapeutic relationship for a number of years with a woman that was heavily interested in Jungian psychoanalysis. As you can imagine, this was a massive influence on me. This was very fortunate for me. I'm very happy that my mum was being sent home with books like Memories, Dreams and Reflections by Jung, Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. You know, these were the things that my mum was being encouraged to imbibe and look into, and that was very good for me, and it's enabled me to grow up and really flourish and do my own healing and help others with their healing as well. So it's very much a key part of what I obviously do with my business and with my spiritual counselling practice, and I have my mum to thank for that. She went on her journey and brought home some content that I imbibed, and it rubbed off on me big time. I think we could probably say that's a bit of an understatement. So at a certain point on my mum's journey, she obviously started looking really deeply into her childhood and all the different stages and phases of her childhood, and thinking about how everything affected her. And at one point she went and had some regression hypnosis, and she discovered some really interesting things from her regression hypnosis. It really worked, and it cleared up a couple of things for her. One of the things that was really interesting for her about regression hypnosis was that she actually found the source of one of her fears. She has a fear of a particular thing, and she never really understood where it came from or what the origin for it was, and she actually found found out the source of it and had the memory, which was from way back when she was like 3 years old. And I found that really, really interesting. My mum talked a lot when she was going through her therapy about the roles that were assigned to her as she was growing up, and the way that those roles had actually rubbed off on her and convinced her that she could only ever behave in a certain way or be seen in a certain way. My mum was really typecast when she was growing up, and I would say that the same thing happened to me actually. I was typecast, I was put into a box, and my mum had to break free. I mean, my mum is a classic cycle breaker. She's had to break so many fucking cycles. When my mum talked about the roles that she was expected to play and the way that she was painted by her family and the particular kind of box that she was placed into, it made me realise a lot of things about how the way that you are raised and the roles that you're expected to play and the way that the adult caregivers perceive you and the way that your siblings subsequently perceive you and all of that kind of thing. It leads to a lot of difficulties in adulthood, and it leads to you feeling trapped in so many different ways, and you have to break that stuff down. You have to decondition your own mind to help you to understand that you are multifaceted and you do have all of these other things that either weren't picked up on or were actively suppressed. It can have a really lasting effect on you. It can have a lasting effect on the way that you conduct your friendships and your romantic engagements, all of this kind of thing. I'm explaining this in a really, really muddled way, so I'm sorry if that was really, really jump cut heavy, but the idea for doing this video came to me really quickly, and I've just got literally a couple of notes on my iPhone. I'm just really flowing into it and seeing where it goes. I'm seeing where it goes. So a lot of my realizations, my initial realizations about the concept of the inner child and the idea that inside of you you're still operating from the instincts and the memories and the beliefs of these younger versions of yourself. This stuff came to me through my mum and through the work that she was doing, and her just kind of gradually explaining it to me over time. And it really started to fascinate me from that point, but I didn't really start to do my own work with it until quite late in the game. When I was going through my therapy, I had a lot of issues with looking back at my childhood. I dealt with a lot of different things to do with my childhood that made it very difficult to look back. And some of the ability that I had to look back on my childhood was actually interfered with by my psychotic break that I experienced in my late teens as well. So I didn't really get to sort of dive into the meat and potatoes of really examining my inner child and meeting up with my inner child and understanding about the importance of that and the value of that until I would say like my mid-20s. I had gone back to reading a lot of the stuff that my mum had around when she started doing her therapy. My mum started to collect sort of quite a little library of like self-help works and spiritual books and things like that, encouraged by her therapist to do so. She just really started to dive into these things. I've often said that like the reason I'm so interested in Jung is because of my mother. My mother actually had me read Memories, Dreams and Reflections to her aloud while we were on holiday in Gran Canaria, and it literally changed my fucking life. It was mind-bending. So yeah, I started to get into texts that my mum was reading. I borrowed some texts from her, I reread some things, started thinking a lot more about psychology and psycho-spiritual stuff again, and you know, this was kind of when I started to explore the idea that certain parts of my nature and some of my behaviours and some of the pain I was going through and some of the ways that I was perceiving things were actually being navigated by younger versions of me, little bits of me that still inside were dynamic and living and trying to control the narrative in some way. And I can't tell you exactly when I began doing this or exactly why, because it's all quite hazy at the moment, but I basically just started to really go back to key times in my childhood where I had some very strong kind of emotional imprints, some strong memories. Now, I've spoken to a lot of people throughout my time doing YouTube and putting stuff online about this kind of thing who say that they do not have lots of strong memories from childhood. They really cannot access a lot of memories from childhood, and asking whether or not that would actually impede their ability to do inner child work. And I would honestly say no, because I don't have that many strong memories either. I have gotten a lot more over time, but in my early 20s and mid-20s, I actually really didn't have have a lot of memories from childhood, and I struggled a lot with confabulation, which is where you can't actually tell the difference sometimes between photos that you've seen or memories that were shared with you by others and your actual memory bank. So I had a lot of memories that were kind of like, is that a memory of that particular street that we lived on, or is that photos that I've seen or stories that have been shared? Do I remember being there, or am I just putting myself into the eyes of me in the photograph and feeling like I can see it there? You know, because my imagination is quite vivid and quite potent, so confabulation was also a big part of my problem. So it was all very hazy, and I still would argue now that other people probably have a lot more memories of their childhood than I do of mine, but I do have some. And what I also have is I have emotional memory. So I may not remember exactly where I was or what I was going through or how I was dressed or who was there, but I have some very deep emotional imprints that I know are from a much younger time. I know that they're from times when I was experiencing things that you experience in childhood. For example, some emotions that come to me and that I go through, I know that they're memories from childhood because I feel instantly as though I'm trapped and I can't get away. I feel as though I'm under somebody else's jurisdiction while I'm having these emotions, and I have no say, I have no control. I feel infantilized, I feel disempowered. I feel as though I have to go along with what somebody else wants me to do. And I know that that comes from childhood. I can tell, I can feel it. I feel infantilized. I feel, you know, as though I'm being kind of what's the word, like I feel like I'm shrinking. I feel like I'm not my adult self. So I know that that memory comes from there. And there's other ways that I can tell as well, and I think it's probably different for every person, so it'd be difficult for me to explain what I mean, but some memories that come along for me, they just feel old. They just feel fucking old, you know. They feel like they come from a place many years ago. And like I said, sometimes I can tell that those memories come from an old place because of the way that I feel when I'm going through them. Like I feel infantilized, I feel like I would have done when I was a child, particularly at certain points in my childhood when things were not fucking good. So I know that those kind of emotional memories come from there. But there are other ways of telling as well, and you can work with those memories. You don't just have to work with actual visuals of events and situations and stuff like that. You can work even with the senses. You know, sometimes a certain smell triggers a certain atmosphere for me that I know I'm kind of taking that back to a childhood place. So you can do that. It doesn't have to be an absolute solid, hard and fast memory. It can be any number of different ways of obtaining information from when you were younger and working with that. I remember saying in a video quite some time ago now, it was when I still had the pink hair actually, that I was watching a Tara Brach talk, and she really is a teacher for me, a real mentor. I was watching one of her talks, and she was saying that sometimes one of the most helpful questions to ask yourself when you're feeling uncomfortable or sad, or something is just feeling really not right for you and you're not centered, you're not in a good place, one of the best questions to ask yourself is, what does this remind me of? How is it familiar to me? And that was a real fucking breakthrough moment for me. And I remember I was doing something while I was listening to this talk, like doing my makeup or something like that, and I just stopped in my tracks. I probably carried on with my lipstick, so it was like up my face. That's how like entranced I was by this idea that you should ask yourself, what does this remind me of? Is it coming from something before? Is it coming from an old place? And the video that I was watching of the talk that she was doing was about conflict. It was about conflict resolution, and it was about approaching conflict with someone you love with your whole heart in it, kind of thing. And I was watching that particular talk because I just had a conflict with somebody that I cared about, that meant a lot to me. And so I thought to myself, okay, you know what, fuck it. I'm going to ask myself, I'm going to go back to that situation that's just happened a number of hours ago, and I'm going to think to myself, what does it remind me of? Is it familiar to me? Does it remind me of something old, something I've already been through? And it was astounding what actually came through from that exploration. I realised that actually it came from a very old place. It came from a very old place. The way that my friend had reacted to what I'd said, and the way that she'd chosen to handle the situation and deal with the situation, reminded me of a way that my mother used to treat me years ago. And it reminded me of something that my mother would do quite often when I was a child that would really hurt and distress me. And the core of it, I'm not going to go into all the whole ins and outs of it, but the core of it was feeling misunderstood, feeling as though I had thought everything was fine and dandy and we were all just having a laugh and everybody was on the same page. But inside of them, inside of my mum, she had thought that I was trying to hurt her or lash out at her. And when she lashed out at me, I was incredibly hurt because she'd totally gotten me wrong. She had completely misunderstood me, and that was so painful. And the other thing was that afterwards, if I tried to explain to her what I had meant by it, or that I didn't mean, you know, the attack that she thought I'd meant, she just shut me down. She cut me off. She would be completely callous with me. And that used to really, really hurt me. And I hadn't thought about it for years and years. And it led to a lot of other feelings as I was growing older as well, about not wanting to be trapped in any situation where that could happen to me without me being able to get away, and all kinds of other things. And it just blew my mind open. Seriously, if you don't know about Tara Brach, please go to her channel. I'll link it below. Do yourself a fucking favour. Just don't listen to me anymore. Just go and listen to her. Oh my goddess, go and listen to her. Anyway, if you're still here, let me carry on. But Tara, she's my bread and butter, honestly. She's my bread and vegan spread, baby. So yeah, so that blew my mind, and I was like, shit, it is something old. It is. That's why it hurts so much, because it's not just about what she just did and the interaction that we've just had and how unpleasant it was. It's not just about that at all. It's about my fucking mum. It's about childhood. It's my inner child that's feeling all of this hurt. And that was an incredible thing to have identified, and it really changed the game for me. Now, when I feel something, and it's a very, very strong feeling, and it's like a negative feeling of some kind, whether it's anger, whether it's frustration, whether it's anxiety, whether it's insecurity, particularly if it's to do with another person, and it can be to do with all kinds of things. It doesn't have to be to do with relationships, but for me, most of the very strong feelings that come up for me, where I go, where's that coming from? Why can't I just deal with that, you know, in a straightforward way? Why is all this emotion coming through? Why do I feel debilitated by this? That normally comes when it's an interaction with another person, for me personally. So when something like that happens and I feel like this is really heavy, you know, what is going on here? I always ask myself, what does this remind you of? How is it familiar? And normally there's a strong root there. And that's really helpful. And that for me was one of the ways that I started to really get back into actively doing inner child work and inner child healing. Another way that I got back into it was through experiencing conflict with various family members. That's a big one as well, because when you experience conflict with family members, or severing from family members, or a lot of tumultuous energy between you and a family member that you grew up with, it will always take you back. It will always take you back in your mind, because you share so much history with them and so many different things have happened, and you've shared so much of your life with them that, of course, that creates a portal, you know what I mean, that goes back to the beginning of you both and the beginning of your relationship. So dealing with my feelings about my family, emancipating myself from certain parts of my family, having to handle strong negative emotions that came up around my relationships with certain family members as well, took me back to childhood and helped me to deprogram myself from a lot of the things that I thought I'd learned about myself, a lot of the roles that were put upon me, and a lot of the difficult wounds and negative feelings that I couldn't hold space for then, and no one could hold space for them then, but I started to take accountability for holding space for them in adulthood. So that was another thing that really brought me to working with the inner child again. But really realising that there was a part of me during that argument with my friend that I've just mentioned that was kind of like 10 years old, 9 or 10 years old, and realising that I felt that she was playing the part of mum and I was like the younger version of me. That was so healing. That was so healing. And you know, it helped me a lot. It helped me to sort that one out and to be able to go and talk to her about it and work it through, you know. So I really would recommend that. That's a good place to start, with just asking, where is this familiar? Does it take you back to somewhere in your adolescence? Does it take you back to somewhere in your childhood? Is there a root? You can really work with the inner child at different ages, and this is something that for my own journey has been really useful to me. So realising that at different stages of my development and at different ages that I arrived at, different stuff was going on for me, and I was experiencing different things, right? So now when certain things come up that kind of take me back or trigger me back into that stuff that happened when I was younger, I'm different ages. And what I've picked up on is that there are certain key ages in my past that have really had an effect that still resonates through to this day. And that's really interesting to me. And it's not just from childhood, it's also from adolescence. There are certain things that I went through, certain time periods that I experienced that still echo to this day. There's still still a ripple that I experience when I go through certain situations or certain things come up. And what it helps for me to do is to have an image in my mind of my inner child at those different ages. So I'll give you an example. I have, throughout my own journey of personal development, recognised quite strongly that I have a desire in the shadow to seek validation, to get praise, to be approved of, to almost perform in a way that everybody is going to approve of and think well of, and I want to be thought highly of. And this comes from a very specific relationship that I had with my father, and by extension with some parts of his immediate family. It came to do with what they thought I was going to be, what they thought my potential was and what I was capable of, the way that they would talk about me and the way that they would compare and contrast me to my sister. And believe me, that really harmed our relationship forever afterwards. So there was a lot of different layers to why when I was growing up, when I grew up, I felt like I had to be a certain way and perform a certain way. And I also noticed during my kind of journey in my own self-development and kind of discovery of who I am and what's going on with me, that I also could be a bit of a court jester for a lot of years when I was younger. You know, like I would be sort of the life of the party, again, because that was what was expected of me when I was younger, and that's what I wanted to play up to. And then people would often think that something was really wrong with me, or that I was really depressed or down if I didn't play this role and if I didn't fulfill this obligation that I had actually created for myself. So when I started to realise that, I thought to myself, what does this remind me of? Where are these feelings coming from? And it took me back to a specific memory that I had of a party that was going on in my dad's flat when I was young. Now, I don't remember what age I was at this party, but I was wearing a dress, and it was like a fairy ballerina dress. It was really cool. Somebody bought it for me for Christmas or birthday or something, and I fucking loved it. It had a white leotard in it, and it had like silver sequins all over it, and a really gorgeous tutu, and I had a fairy wand with it. It was fucking sick. And I was running around this party like a mad thing, probably high on sugar, and I just remember just kind of like, I don't know, just playing up to the adults, and just wanting to be thought of in a certain way, and wanting to be seen as a certain kind of child, and always being very, very aware of what the adults around me were thinking of me. And it was very performative, and I realised from having that memory that I was actually a very performative child. I was actually very concerned with how I was thought of and how I was being approved of and how I was making people proud and how I was obtaining the praise that to me equated to love. And so now I like to keep the vision of that little younger version of me in my head, in that dress, running around with the wand. And it's helped me to feel kind of okay about some of these behaviours that I exhibit sometimes, that can come from a shadowy place, or some of these desires that I have sometimes, because I recognise that this younger version of me is trying to control the narrative, and that's really a useful thing for me to have. And it's a useful way for me to self-parent and self-soothe and say, look, you are not the court jester. You're not anyone's life and soul of the party. If you want to go away and be on your own, you can do, and you don't have to play up to this, and you don't have to feel that that expectation is on you. And you know, and also you don't have to make other people suffer because you think that's what they want, when that's probably not what they want at all, and you've just taken that and made it into this thing because of what happened when you were younger and the way that the dynamic was set up. So it's helped me to give myself a lot of compassion, and it's helped me to lean into where I feel vulnerable and actually use it, you know. So I keep that memory, and I recognise when I've gone back to that little fairy ballerina outfit, and I just I notice what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to obtain and what I'm trying to achieve, and it's from there that I can make a different choice. It's not like I'm trying to suppress that part of me. I just know that it comes from an old place and it's not necessarily helpful, and I can make a different choice in that moment. And that's what I kind of mean by working with the inner child at different ages. I also know that I have quite a close and strong relationship with certain points of me in adolescence, like adolescent versions of myself. When I get angry, when I feel very self-protective or defensive, or as though I have to act in my own interests in a way that could be destructive or out of character, I know that I'm going back to a part of my adolescence where things were very unstable and chaotic, and I felt constantly threatened and constantly on edge because of what was going on in my household. So I know then that I'm accessing that part, I'm going back to that, And I know that I can tell myself then that I'm no longer in survival mode, and I no longer have to behave that way. I can actually choose differently. I actually am free now. I'm no longer under that tyranny. So that's the kind of thing that you can do when you actually start to interact with your inner child and your inner adolescent at different ages. You can choose differently, and you can give yourself that compassion that you need when you do find that you're acting in a way that is out of character or is destructive or is shadowy. You can say, what does this situation remind me of? Where am I going back to in my head? And, you know, very often there is a route there. And I would love to know if you actually do use this exercise, if you're thinking about it during this video, or if you think about it later and you try it. I would absolutely love to know if you get any result from that, or indeed if that's something that you already do. For me, contacting my inner child and working with her at different ages has been useful in my spirituality, particularly because I have spoken before on the channel about the fact that I really was a witch from a very, very, very long time ago. Like, I would go into trances, I would scry with crystals and with the clouds. I would, like, you know, create kind of, I don't know, ritualistic mandala style collections of objects and bless them and imbibe them with my energy. Like, all of the games that I played, most of them solo, were very much to do with, you know, enchanting things and having, you know, blessed sacred objects. And all of the characters that I was interested in Disney and in films and books, they were all witches. They all were enchantresses. They could all, you know, do weird and wonderful woo-woo things with their minds. And, you know, so really from a very long time ago, I was really steeped in that excitement of the power of witchcraft and magic. And it was what I was all about. It was what I was all about. So when I was older and I started to realise, you know, that I was actually a witch, and I actually had to come back to it and embrace it and let myself drink it in, I really thought to myself that it's all about going where you find power and potency. A lot of the books that I was reading didn't give me any sense of power and potency. The suggestions that I read in there for spells or the way to set things up or whatever, they did nothing for me. And I thought to myself, well, let me go back to those times when I was younger, when I was really all about the power and the potency and the excitement, because I didn't know anything else. You know, I just wanted to make myself feel a certain way and experience a certain thing. So let me go back to that and let me just take from that as much as I want, so I can make my current adult practice the way that it needs to feel and the way that it needs to be in order for me to work powerful ritual and do potent spells. So that's what I did. I went back to my childhood, and I had left a lot of doors unlocked there in various places because of the self-development work that I'd done. I already recognised the value of working with the inner child. So when I started to look at how I saw witchcraft when I was a kid, what kinds of things I wanted to do, what kinds of words I wanted to say, what did I want to wear, what did I fantasize about my altar looking like, and that kind of thing. I just started to take that and bring it with me into adulthood, and it was very useful. It was very, very helpful. So for me, one of the key ways that the inner child has really spoken up for the good and been a positive force for my life is in my spiritual journey, in my spiritual work. It was really about looking at what was making me feel really fizzy back then when I was younger, and knowing that I could make my own way and I could do my own thing. I could use what spoke to me back then when everything was very, very instinctual and very organic and just flowed from me. And I'm not saying I didn't take any inspiration from any of the films or the fairy tales or anything. Of course I did, but it just came from this very unstructured place, which was filled with excitement, and where, you know, I didn't really let ego get involved and I didn't really let outside opinions interfere too much. It was my personal world, and it was very, very strongly built. It was very sturdy, that world. It was like a fucking biosphere. It had its own atmosphere. And I thought to myself, well, that's still available to me. I can have that, and I can make my witchcraft all the more potent because of it. So that was one thing that I did with inner child work that really, really helped me. And the other place where working with the inner child really helped is creativity. And I know this is a big thing for so many people. This is something that a lot of people have to revert back to if they feel stunted in their creative life, if they feel like the ego is getting in the way too much and they're too concerned about what they're going to produce and how it's going to be judged. So they kind of clam up, they kind of seize up. And a lot of those people have to go back to how they were in childhood, before the ego and the sense of competition and insecurity and the need to exhibit skill came into the equation. We have to go back to a point where we could just make a piece of art for our mum for Mother's Day with like macaroni and glitter. We need to go back to that part of childhood where we would just make things for ourselves, where we would just have our own secret book of drawings or collage or whatever, or we would write songs for ourselves and we just sing them to ourselves, you know, that kind of thing, where it wasn't about anyone else, it was just about being in your own world. So many people have to go back to that to really allow their creative life to find water again for the roots, you know, and really just kind of flourish and thrive. I've definitely gone through times in my life where I let the ego take over, where I was insecure about other people's skills against my own skills, and whether or not it was okay to just do what I wanted regardless of whether or not it was objectively good enough or whatever. You know, I think a lot of people go through that, and when we actually allow ourselves to go back to those former times where we didn't have as many of those hang-ups, really beautiful things can happen. And lastly but not leastly, another area where it's been good for me to connect with my inner child is in my friendships and in my relationships with people. I have noticed that good friendship is the kind of friendship where you make room for each other's inner kid, you know, and I love that. I really love that. And I've noticed that the strongest friendships that I have in my life now are the friendships where we do let ourselves be silly and playful, and we do kind of, it's kind of difficult to explain, and I think all friendship dynamics are so different, but I really let myself be fucking silly, you know, and I also let myself be a little bit demanding, not in a horrible way, like demanding of my friends, but just kind of like being like, I want to do that today, that's what I'm gonna do, who's with me, kind of thing, and not feeling as though it's not okay to do that. It's not okay to say what you want and go out and have an adventure and get what you want and have fun, you know. I think a lot of people are afraid to be playful. And I like to think that in my relationships and friendships with people, I have been one of those people that does encourage people to be playful. And a few of my friends and partners have said to me in the last few years particularly that they feel like they can be playful with me, and like the inner child is invited and we can like really connect with those parts of us, and it's all good fun. And I love that. I love that I can facilitate that, and I love that I've found people that can facilitate that for me in return. So I suppose I'll end this video by suggesting that you give some thought to whereabouts you can encourage someone in your life to be more playful, be silly, be less concerned with what people think and more concerned with just what, you know, what is going to organically unfold in the next moment, what they want to do, how they feel that they want to experience joy or power. And, you know, let people hold that space for you to be silly and playful as well. Enjoy yourself, you know. And if you experienced a childhood where you couldn't do that for some reason, for any number of reasons, then you can always, as somebody wrote underneath one of my last videos, I'm not sure where they got the quote from, I don't know if it was something they were quoting from me or from someone else because it was a pretty long video, but somebody quoted underneath one of my previous inner child videos, you can always have your childhood again. And I believe that. I believe that. So go forth and be silly, roll around, roll down a fucking hill, make a daisy chain, you know, sit around in your pajamas and watch Labyrinth. And I also want to mention a couple of other things before I say goodbye today, cupcakes. The first is that I have made an e-zine, and it's called Notes for Inner Child Work. It's just a cute little e-zine. It's like 17 or 18 pages long, and it's just got a few thoughts, just a collection of little suggestions and some journal prompts for you. You can go over to my website now and you can download it, you can just view it, or you can print it. I'll leave the link down below for you, and I'll also leave the link to my free gifts page. Actually, the link that I leave down below will just be for my free gifts page, because there's probably quite a few of you watching this video that aren't aware that I also have other free e-zines for download as well that you can just check out. So I'll leave the link to the free gifts page. And I also do offer an inner child reading that you can purchase on my shop, so I'll leave that down below as well. I absolutely love doing that reading for people. I really get to the bottom of you know, the energies that were in you or around you in childhood, the dynamics from childhood that still affect you now, key ways to work with your inner child at the moment, that kind of thing, obstacles that you might be experiencing whilst trying to work with your inner child. So go ahead and check out the reading if you've been wanting to get a reading from me, or you think it might be the right time to delve further in. I'm very sensitive with the inner child readings. The spread positions are so useful, they're so in depth. Come over and take a look. You can purchase the reading as a pre-recorded video link on YouTube, totally unlisted. You can purchase it as an email delivered to you as a PDF, or we can do a live Skype reading, so it's totally up to you. Much love until next time. Blessed be.